listening to the Armenian Radio of New Jersey. We just heard this beautiful music composed by Michel Ekizian from the opera Gorky, his Dream Garden. Michel, thank you for joining us. Professor Yakubi, thank you for joining us. And Professor Teixeira, I may be pronouncing your names wrong, but welcome to the radio. We were really honored to have you. I'm sure you have a lot to say about the opera. We'll start with Michel. Michel, can you once again introduce your guests and the relationship you've had with these fine gentlemen?
Well, Pele is my pilgrim of steel. He's my mentor. And we met when we both had the Prix de Rome from the American Academy of Rome in 1988. And Pele was a senior scholar. He is his field is comparative literature and Italian studies. And now he is professor emeritus of Hofstra University, and as well as other places as NYU and Columbia. And his mentor, his protege was Yusef, who was a professor at Hofstra, a young professor at Hofstra, and Pele took him under his wing like he did me. Even though I'm a musician and Pele's a poet, the first thing he said when we met at the academy, you're a musician, I'm a poet, we must collaborate. Yeah, well, so we've been collaborating. And Yusef is a wonderful scholar and following in the Pele tradition of being studying the academics in the most outreaching global humanitarian way. Yusef is a professor of Islamic, North African studies here at Seton Hall, and global studies, and his new theory is creating humanities through an ecumenical perspective, which is very much in tune with the way I approach these big music projects. Music is a way to bring people together. We're not. It is spiritual and religious, but it's like a religion without a religion.
Thank you, Michel. Once again, we are joined by Michel Ekizian, Professor Yakubi, and Professor Pellegrino. And we are discussing a musical theater opera entitled Gorky's Dream Garden, which will be hosted by the Newark Museum that is located 49 Washington Street in Newark. And this will be on Saturday, September the 7th. Also, there will be a pre-concert spectacle that starts at 1:30 p.m. with a performance following at 2 p.m. And as Michel just announced, it's a free opera. And Michel, when did you decide to write this opera? You know, when you write the opera, I was thinking, what does it take to write an opera? There has to be a very powerful story. There may be some tragedy or a life story. There has to be victory at the end. When did you decide, and what elements of Gorky fits into an opera?
Okay, well, his story is so operatic. And early on, when I became serious with writing music, and I was a doctorate student at Columbia University, and I've gotten on to the idea of researching the ethnographic elements of Armenian music and also the spiritual underpinnings of the pathos and ethos of the Armenian genocide survivors, which my grandparents on both sides of my family were. And growing up, I thought they were all nut jobs. But it wasn't until I came of age and in college years that I knew that their stories had the underpinnings of opera. Grand opera is all about transcending, trying to rise above. It's all about being passionate, proactive, seeking catharsis. These are things you don't normally approach in everyday life or everyday entertainment, but only in grand opera and symphony, high symphony music, we can kind of approach this.
And I see Professor Pellegrino wanted to jump in, please.
Well, I just had a question regarding what you said in terms of victory at the end. How did you deal with Gorky's tragic ending, his suicide and his separation from his wife, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, well, as some of the modern critics of today would say, well, how do you deal with the suicide? And I don't. I think the way I've posed it is more riveting and visceral than showing a man on a desolate Connecticut property with dogs barking and a scream and a hanging noose flashing. I have him go back hours before his death, in his dreams, to his place of beginnings, which is his lands of Lake Van, where he grew up with his beautiful martyred brother Shushan and his sisters. And the tradition of the area, and I guess throughout Armenia, is the sunrise ritual of the wishing tree. And so instead of Gorky screaming and, that's the end of the opera, the curtain then opens into this glorious sunrise ceremony with all the villagers around this withered tree giving their prayers and their wishes. They tear off strips of clothing and write prayers for peace and put it by the tree. And then as the day breaks, the rainbow arcs through the sky, and Gorky character is up against this gorgeous theatrical set with his arms spread out in crucifix pose. And the music is very glorious. And in a way, it makes the tragedy more tragic, because to see the beauty and the epic glory of what he had in his head all the time, and what he had to leave behind because of the genocide, that to me has more impact than nooses hanging and dogs barking and police flashlights. Where's Gorky?
Michelle, what aspect of his life is the opera concentrating on? There is the period of the genocide, immigrating to America, working with de Kooning and Pollock, other artists, which are where his peers, and he was a really well-respected artist. He was a self-taught artist, and then him marrying the non-Armenian woman, and also the tragedy that befell before the hanging and the fire and the cancer and other things. What aspect of Gorky's life are you concentrating on?
Okay, well, I must say first off that this is part of a 3-part series, and Gorky's Dream Garden is the last of the series. I started the last first, like Yogi Berra says, you have to know where you're going in order to get there. So I figured I'm going to start last, and the last portion is the final years of his life.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Professor Yacoubi, you're sitting very quietly, you're listening to everything that's been said. When did you hear about this production, and what do you know about the production? And tell us about the T-shirt you're wearing and the beautiful words that are highlighted on the T-shirt. Maybe you can start with reading the T-shirt.
Right. You can read it from there.
So you can help me, but I would like to hear
a
your
dream.
voice.
Yeah. Well, Pelly made these up because he's the maestro of aphorisms.
Beautiful.
He took the saying from, well, we'll say a famous feminist. Let's see if somebody
Gertrude
can.
Stein.
But
be honest about it.
A
Rose
dream
is a
is a dream garden.
Beautiful. That's it.
All right.
So how do you feel about the whole story, the adventure?
Well, first of all, the first time I heard about it, obviously from Michel, and I think I have been I've been lucky. I've been quite lucky to be introduced to this kind of art, metaphysical art, and the way it especially reflects on pain, suffering, genocide, and that experience of annihilation, and that experience of being othered by history and by structures of oppression. So what fascinates me about Michelle's work is the way she has managed to reflect on a work that itself that is deeply pensive in itself and also global. In other words, it connects with other experiences of annihilation and termination, termination of dreams, termination of selves, termination of bodies, and so on. And I think this is where Gorky's and also Michelle's kind of interpretation and representation of it is fascinating, because it reaches out to a global issue that is in our human history, and that is, how do we speak about the unspeakable? That is, how do we speak about trauma? about depersonalization, about the history of termination. When a system or a structure terminates your humanity, terminates your essence, terminates your right to express your humanity fundamentally. And I think this is the fundamental kind of advantage, of really considering Gorky's work and thinking through its kind of complexity and its figurative representation quite deeply and seriously, and connect it to other works. Obviously, I'm someone who works on the Middle East. I come from a comparative literature background and I also work on the Middle East. And I can see already that Gorky should be situated, really, even though he was obviously writing within the American context. And Michel has done a great job in expressing the repressions in his work, those traces of being Armenian that has been repressed to begin with. And why? Why is it that Gorky has managed to actually repress those traces, those fundamental sentiments?
That's the way Exile works.
Professor Pellegrino, how do we speak about the unspeakable?
That's a good, difficult question.
That's what Professor Yacoubi just mentioned.
Well, I would begin, though, by positing what Edward Said, the term he uses, the median state, which is a way in which he tries to access what it means to be an exile. And, Gorky was the exemplary exile. And that means that at a certain point you affiliate yourself with your past memory, but at the same point you have to affiliate yourself with the present. You have to adjust to the present, and you never can quite pull it off. You never quite can pull it off, so you always remain perpetually alienated from yourself. And what is the cure for that? Art. Art is the only cure. And I want to ask a question to you about that. An American question, which we have to always ponder with, especially if you're an Armenian. What is American and what is Armenian about Gorky? But then the question to ask, translating that, is what is Armenian and what is American about your music and your treatment of Gorky? And I say that because the struggle to be exile is to double oneself. And to double one's music is to be contrapuntal. And I think that there's a contrapuntalism that runs through your music that I find totally captivating. So the question is your music American or Armenian? Well, how do you explain that divide?
Well, I don't want to get into Armenian cliches and say what part of me is the Armenian, the fact that I have a low fuse, I get excited. The fact that my music is very detailed and oriented like diamond cutters. I don't want to get into cliches, but I think this idea of layering and complex psychosis. I blink my eyes. Everybody sees I blink my eyes. There's a lot going on in my little pea brain here. Is that Armenian? I don't know. But this idea of bringing the old and the new, bringing outreaching very simple terms, mixing them with very complex internal terms through art. So I'm not writing minimalist music. I'm not writing music that's straight ahead. I'm writing, but I want to write music that has an epic feel to it and that has a transcendence feel to it.
Michel, why Newark Museum?
Well, they came forth in the winter offering this wonderful spot that they are presenting, letting me present there. They're hosting the place. They have the most fantastic state-of-the-art theater, the Billy Johnson Theater. But Newark has a resonance with Gorky. I don't know if many people know. But they house his airport murals that he created in the 1930s for the WPA. During Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's time, the city commissioned the artists of the day, and they were major artists. De Kooning and all of those guys did these WPA projects. Miraculously, Gorky got assigned projects doing with aviation, and he had several projects in the aviation, which was a very burgeoning industry. It was a very exciting industry. I mean, along with Glenn Miller and the big band music of the 30s, this was a great volatile time. And Gorky's there creating airport murals. They were for the Newark airport. After the war, during the war, they were covered over by coats of paint. And in the 1980s or so, somebody discovered a thread sticking out of the wall when they were refurbishing the Newark airport, and they miraculously discovered these fabulous panels that they were thought to be lost. So the two panels that they were able to salvage are prominent in the Newark Museum. They're huge. They're the first thing you see when you walk into this glorious museum. And I say it's my favorite spot for Gorky because unlike the other museums where, the famous artist and his mother is in the Whitney, and that's downstairs by the bathroom, by the hallway to the bathroom. It's not a prominent place. National Gallery of Art with the other artists and his mothers, you got to walk miles to find the thing. But here, the first thing you do is you walk in and you see these fabulous things, and they're like greeting you with verve, and they're standing present.
You have included dance in your opera, and there is the one dance, the Exile dance by
the
Needle.
Dance of the Exiled Heart.
Yeah, Dance
Lynn.
of the Exiled Heart.
Yeah.
And Lynn Needle. Tell me about Lynn and that dance. What role does it play in the opera?
Okay, well, in the opera, there are two intermezzos, and they are turning points. The first intermezzo is a nostalgic intermezzo. The second one, going toward the second half of the opera, the real turning point is the sorrowful intermezzo. And that is where I created music with my late collaborator, Richie Havens, singing my version of Amen Har Surp, a 10-minute version of this spiritual hymn that comes out of darkness. It's the exiled heart's journey. He's coming out of darkness, and he's aiming to rise above. Then, little by little, I figured out that this is really a way to communicate this best is to show a dance component with it. But it can't be any dancer. It has to be someone that uses the body as a decentralizing force, a global force, something that encompasses everything. And we're not doing gymnastic classes. We're not doing folk dance class. Lynn Needle is a disciple of the famous, innovative ballet master Alwyn Nicolai. And he invented this concept of the body as decentralization. It wasn't from the core that then everything emanates. He's using every part of the body. The Italian opera composers are using every part of the human voice to express the passion and the tragedies and the agonies. So with the Art of Motion, her ballet company is after Alwyn Nicholas's theory of decentralization called the Art of Motion. And wildly enough, Gorky's art is like art in motion.
Yeah.
His music, his artwork is very fluid, and it's like he got onto the floating biomorphic shapes. Yeah, maybe because he liked the idea of aeroplanes and aviation. That was great synchronicity that he got onto this idea of flying. But there's a movement to it. It's not static.
How many performers are there? I know you mentioned Maro Partamian and Hasmik Mekhanejian. Are there other Armenians in that group?
Yes. Well, for today, Maro has performed this sections of this since the get-go. Now we've been on this so long that Maro is a little kind of out of the loop. She still is a natural wonder, but now playing the part of Shushan is Hasmik. And in the full opera, now what we're going to hear on Saturday, next Saturday, is a reduction. And we're reducing a cast of thousands and an orchestra, a huge orchestra and choir, and a cast of 14 singers to just 3 singers, 2 actors, and 3 musicians. So 8 people altogether. Hasmik is the sole Armenian, and I did not pick her because she's an Armenian. I certainly the role of Gorky is cast for Broadway's most venerable, one of Broadway's most venerable leading men, Brent Barrett, and he is so great at this role. It's spooky. I don't think any Armenian actor or singer could emulate that. So it's a mixed cast.
You know, Professor Pellegrino, yesterday I was with some friends and they said if Arshil Gorky hadn't hung himself, he would be as popular as de Kooning, who took over. But overall, what is your message as we wrap up today's discussion? What would you like to add?
Well, I just think that he's very important for Armenian cultural identity because he embodies a kind of triumph through art over the genocide.
Professor Pellegrino has mentioned about exile. I think exile is not necessarily a negative thing.
Yeah.
It's a positive thing. I mean, Edward Said once said, when you're in exile, it's like wearing two pairs of glasses. You see things, you observe things, you pay attention to details, and then you render those details into artistic energy. And then, but most importantly, and that takes me to the second point, is that paradox between pain or trauma and the sublime. In other words, to what extent Gorky has actually managed, because when you look at the details of actually what happened and the genocide, you look at the details, the historic details, the level of torture, the level of negation of the body and the negation of the spirit. So, that's why the transcendent is always important. Yeah. You see to what extent, Gorky is able to elevate all of that into something, into the sublime through art.
Majestic.
That will always remain important in our humanity as a whole, not just within the Armenian context, but across the other context, within the American context itself, as we experience, other forms of trauma, negation, and exclusion of others. So to answer your question, really, is that Gorky's work will always, I think, remain important. And I think what Michelle has done is that I think she has given it another reading within opera that allows it to be spoken, but allows it to be read by many. That is, those who are musically minded, because music is the motion of the spirit.
Gorky did so much, gave so much, but if you really expand that picture and look at the Armenian people in general, as a people, the fact that they were able to survive the 1915 genocide is not only miraculous, we always celebrate it as a resurrection.
Right.
And one of the most popular Armenian name is Harutun, which simply means resurrection.
Yes.
And for that, I really
that was my father's name.
Listen, there are many people I know whose name is Harut, and the older generation brought out these names to bring the spirit of the Armenian in terms of these are resurrected people.
Right.
And besides the Christian faith and the church, etc. Michelle, in wrapping up, what would you like to say?
Well, encapsulating what you're saying, that's the gist of this, to have this spirituality. And I'm afraid from now that my parents, my father's generation are all dead, that fervor, like you were just saying, is dwindling. And our Armenian community is using just the Armenian as an entertainment, and they're not using it. I mean, when you talk about transcendence and rising above and catharsis, that takes a deep spiritual analysis and even something more than the church-going philosophy. And I want to use this piece as a way of sharing with people to get out of their comfort zone. Get out of the comfort zone and get into a more visceral, more meditative, more magical, dreamy, pronounced thought.
Yes, you want to say something?
Very quickly, I think what Michelle is really getting at is the idea of depth. I think that not just the Armenian community, but many communities have lost, are losing, will be losing the importance of depth.
Yes.
That's why art sits at the heart of this reflection, and also at the heart of the future. If we were to be optimistic, we need to continue to think deeper, to reflect deeper, to be deeper readers, not just consumers.
Yes. Get out of the comfort zone.
Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Professor Pellegrino. You're a heavy man. You're a poet. You've known Gorky for many years. You mentioned Edward Said, and you mentioned all these. So go for it. And that's it. We have to wrap it up.
Okay.
Well, I just want to praise Michelle's music, and I think that it's not a text of pleasure, like a Hollywood movie, but it's a text of bliss. It confers an extraordinary jouissance, bliss, joy, pleasure,
Bravo.
all right, that takes us out of our comfort zone.
Bravo.
And that's what makes us, through art, makes us artistic exiles, and therefore makes us aware and have an excited, exaggerated sense of self-consciousness. Okay? And that's the only way.
Let me thank Michel Ekizian, Professor Yakubi, and Professor Pellegrino. I really, really appreciate your being here, taking time out. I think you have enlightened us. You have inspired us with your comments. And Michel, the Armenian people are not dormant. They are alive. There is depth. There is life. And thanks to people like you who contribute to the well-being and give us so-called spiritual and mental nourishment, we will be and we are very healthy people. Thank you very much. And we're going to end this this interview with Michel Ekizian's opera trailer, which is coming up now. Thank you very much again.
With the sound of laughter glide through the green uplands of freedom.
Permit me, but the common style caters to impoverished imagination.
Imagine